Hey guys, Matt Easton here, Scholar Gladiatoria. So quite a few discussions have come up on the internet recently regarding crossguards for various different reasons, and let's be honest, one of those reasons is Star Wars. Yes, that's right, Star Wars does sometimes generate interesting and useful discussion on historical weapons. So I'm not going to talk about Star Wars, but I am going to talk about crossguards, specifically on longswords in this case, although you could apply it to other medieval cross-hilted swords like arming swords, or indeed messers and things like this. So what am I going to say? Well, first of all, what I'm holding here is what hopefully most of my viewers will now know is called, what we call a federschwert, which means a feather sword. Is German for feather sword. What is it? Well, I should also mention that they were probably not called federschwert historically. They were probably called federschwert or something else. In fact, the fencing treatises don't call them anything. They just call them a sword. But it's very clear from looking at particularly kind of late 15th century and 16th century treatises, for example like Joachim Meyer or Paula Sector-Meyer, that these were the standard fencing version, in other words the safe kind of sparring version of a longsword at that period. And it's also worth mentioning that they only really turn up in Germany and German influenced areas. So we see them in the Netherlands, we see them in parts of eastern France, we see them in what's now Poland and what's now Czech Republic and so on, but you do not really see them, well, I would say, I'm not going to say categorically you never see them, but I have never seen any examples from Italian art or any known Italian examples. Equally, you don't really see English or French. So most part of France, most of modern France, you don't see examples from. You don't see examples from England. You don't see examples from, generally speaking, from Spain. Although they do have a type of sword called a montante, which is a two-handed sword in Spain and Portugal, and the montante does have a feature which is similar to this. And the main characteristic of this so-called federschwert, apart from the fact that it obviously has a blunt, narrow, flexible blade which is less offensive, is the flared ricasso. And this is where it comes back to crossguards. So one of the probable reasons to have this big flared, as it's called, schild or shield of the ricasso is that when you cross another blade, and I'll grab another example here, and you'll notice that these two examples have slightly differently shaped schilts or ricassos, and there's a variety amongst the historically surviving examples. There's a variety of different shapes, but you'll notice that if we cross blades, if one blade slides down, okay, it generally gets either deflected or caught on the ricasso, on the flared ricasso, and this of course is a good extra protection for your hands. One of the unfortunate characteristics of medieval hilts is whilst you do have a crossguard, okay, which in Star Wars universe may be seen as a major invention, in the medieval world a crossguard was pretty much your most basic handguard. Whilst you do have a crossguard, there are things that can go wrong with just a crossguard, and having that addition of a schild or flared ricasso at the base of the blade gives you an extra degree of hand protection. Now, the point I really want to make in this video is that there's something you can do to prevent a very common injury in longsword. So one of the things that often happens in longsword is, notice that if I'm holding my longsword here, look at where my thumb is. Okay, the back of my hand, if we cross blades here, the back of my hand is generally protected from most angles, even if I don't have a flared ricasso. So obviously a normal longsword does not have this type of flared ricasso. Okay, so if you just imagine that this flared ricasso is not here. So if it's a normal straight blade, and if the other person's blade slides down, my blade, generally speaking, the back of my hand, that is the index finger and my knuckles and so on and so forth, in most angles are pretty safe. It's very rare that you really get hit on that part. So what often commonly happens in longsword is actually that people get hit on the thumb, and it's because if you can see how the blades are crossed here, if a cut's coming from the outside line and you cross it with your point up, you'll notice that the blade, if I just move in closely there so you can actually see in the camera, the blade can describe an angle which is unfortunately very liable to hit you on the thumb. Now there's one very easy way to avoid this, and that is when you make a blade engagement that is one of these sort of angles whereby a blade can slide down your inside line and would normally then collide with your thumb, all you do is this. Okay, it's as simple as that. And I've for many years been in the habit of, whenever I form an inside guard, essentially what would be in, say, a cart, but you know, for example, would be a gioco largo incrociata in Fiore longsword. Whenever I bring the longsword over to this side, all I do is stick the thumb up. And you can see some hints of this being standard practice in certain longsword treatises. Obviously in the German Lichtenau lineage, you often see the thumb placed up actually flat against the schilt. You don't really see that in Italian treatises. However, what you do see in Italian treatises is the thumb just raised up and sticking up in the air. There's some hints, you can see this in certain versions of Fiore. You can definitely see it in Filippo Vardi, and you can seem to see it in Achille Marozzo with the two-handed sword as well. So there we go. A general piece of advice is, when forming the guard on the inside line, which is sometimes liable to the blade sliding down and hitting your thumb, yeah, like that, all you need to do is raise the thumb up, and now there's no thumb there to hit. Okay, so have a little play with it. It's a little bit difficult for me to demonstrate, obviously, by myself in a small room with two long swords, but hopefully you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. When you close the line on the left hand side and bind, if you just lift the thumb up and it doesn't lessen your grip on the sword, or it doesn't really affect anything adversely at all, just stick the tip of your thumb up and you'll notice that your thumb doesn't get hit so often. Okay, cheers, bye guys.